Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Todd Schull. I serve as the lead learner for the South Carolina Education Association Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. We call ourselves Cool. You can find out more about us at cool.us. That's CEWL.us. Let me put the link up there. There it is, right there, CEWL.us. And I have to tell you, I'm extremely excited about tonight's live stream and our guests that we're bringing on. We have the privilege of hosting one of the most influential voices in education reform and policy, Diane Ravitch. Diane is a renowned historian of education, a prolific author, a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education, and throughout her illustrious career, she's brought insightful critiques and perspectives to the forefront of discussions surrounding educational practices and policies. Her work sparks debate, it challenges conventional wisdom, and significantly shapes the landscape of education discourse here in the United States. So I don't want to talk anymore. Let's bring on Diane Ravitch. How are you doing tonight, Diane?
Just great. Thanks. Wonderful to be with you, Todd, and hello to teachers in South Carolina and wherever else you're tuning in from.
I am absolutely thrilled to have this conversation. And when you said yes, I'll be honest with you, I did a little dance when you agreed to do it. And that made my day and that my week to know that you would be coming on a live stream and sharing your thoughts with the educators here in South Carolina. Let's start off with, the focus of tonight's live stream is a subject you tweet a lot about it and you write about it on your blog. Let's talk about the war on public schools and the sort of drive to privatize them, to hand them over to the free market. Where did this kind of start? Did it start with the nation at risk, or where exactly did it start? And can you kind of connect the dots, the historical dots from where it started to where we are today?
Well, there have always been people in our society who didn't want to pay for public education and who thought that it should be a parent's responsibility and not the state responsibility. But we have a far more powerful history and tradition of the public recognizing that you can't do it alone, that education is a communal responsibility. And just as we don't hire our own security guards, we pay for police. We don't hire our own fire protector. We have a fire department. These are public responsibilities. And I could go on with the highways or something that are a public responsibility. We have public beaches. We have community swimming pools. We have all kinds of things where the public recognizes this is something we have to do together. And even though I don't use it personally, I may never drive on that highway, but we need that highway. And when we look at education, we say, all right, my kids are grown, but I still am paying taxes for other people's children. Or I never had children, but I still pay taxes because I don't want to live in a society where there are huge numbers of people who are not educated. I want to live in a society that's constantly becoming more modern, more civilized, more scientific in its orientation, and is growing and developing in a way that makes us not number one, because I don't think that's important, but that makes us a society where people care about each other and where they take care of one another through taxes to make sure that we don't have people literally dying of starvation or of lack of medical care. And we don't want to be that kind of a place. We don't want to be like the early 19th century where people were dying on the streets. So we want to be a better society. I guess that's the bottom line why we have public education and why we're willing to pay to educate other people's children. And I think the privatization movement is one of radical individualism, and it's a combination of religious people who want to see their religious schools supported by public funds and have never had that advantage due to constitutional restraints. But it's also people who are don't want to pay taxes. They have a lot of money and they don't want to pay for other people's children. They think everybody should be on their own. So this has been a conversation that's gone on in American history for many years, and up until recently, public education was our way of doing things, our way of making a better society for the future. What we've seen in the past, oh, certainly since the nation at risk, is that the forces, the anti-public education forces, began creating ammunition to use against the schools. I did not realize at the time that report came out during the Reagan administration how it would be used and how it would be used to discredit public schools. Uh, but it began almost immediately. It began with people saying our schools are failing, we have a rising tide of mediocrity. If our foreign enemy adversaries wanted to destroy our society, they couldn't have done a better job because our schools have been dumbed down. Now, that was 1983. And in the meanwhile, we've gone on, let's see, that 17 and 20, almost 24, whatever the math is there. I'm not going to do it. It's been a long time. We have not, if a nation at risk were right, we should by now be a third world nation. And so that report used things like international test scores to say we're falling behind. We're falling behind this. Japan is taking our auto industries. Germany is taking this industry, and we are losing economically because of our mediocre schools. Well, it turns out we're doing very well, and those international test scores I've learned over the decades don't predict anything. If they did, as I said, would be a third world country by now, and we're not. Although there are parts of this country that might as well be considered third world because of their lack of investment in their children. So the war on public education began to heat up with the claims that our schools were failing, when in fact they were not failing. And one of the writers, one of the staff members at Nation at Risk, is a man named James Harvey, and he's on the board of an organization that I'm very involved in, the Network for Public Education. And Jim Harvey wrote recently that a nation at risk was really cooking the books. They had statistics that showed the success of American education, but the panel members, and some were particularly influential. There was only one educator on the board or on the commission that wrote that report, but the panel members were determined to say the schools are failing. And every time he would correct the data, it would be cherry picked to say failure, failure, failure. But the same and other data could have been assembled to say we should be very proud of our schools. They are the institution that holds our society together, that teaches children to live with people who are different from themselves, and that are the heart of their communities. And are they perfect? No. Can they be better? Yes. Should we invest more in them and invest more in paying teachers what they deserve? Yes. It could have been that kind of a report because the data, Jim Harvey says, the data were there to make that argument that our schools have been an amazing success and we should support them to the hilt. But the cherry pick data was used to say failing. And so from 1983, when that report came out, until the present, we continue to hear this language of failure. And one of the things that I've done in my career is I spent, I was Assistant Secretary of Education in the George H.W. Bush administration. And subsequently, I was appointed by President Clinton to the National Assessment Governing Board. That's the board that oversees national testing. And every time the scores come out, every 2 years on reading and math, the newspapers have these blaring headlines about how many kids are failing, and they misuse the data because they say, well, we have X percent of kids are not proficient in reading. Well, here's the thing you always have to remember about NAEP data, and this is what it's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. NAEP data has 4 levels. One is advanced, and that's about 5 to 8% of the kids in the country, done on a sampling basis. The second level is called proficient. Proficient is very high performance. It represents what I would consider A-level performance. So when you read in a headline, only 40% of kids are proficient, that's ridiculous. The headline should be, wow, 40% of our kids are performing at an A level. If it were any higher than that, we would say that the schools were practicing grade inflation, or that the test scores or that the scoring was too easy. But 40% is a good number. And that number has been turned into, oh gosh, half of our kids can't read, or, whether it's science or reading or math or any other subject, that data is misinterpreted. The third achievement level on NAEP is called basic, and that's your pass-fail number right there. And most of our kids, the overwhelming majority of our kids, are above basic. The kids we should worry about are the ones who are below basic, and most of those are children who don't speak English, who live in desperately poor circumstances, or have all sorts of social and economic problems. Etc. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but I just want to make the point that the testing data is misused, and that the state tests that are given are almost worthless.
It seems to me, Diane, that we that test and punish culture that was created was set up with these arbitrary sort of metrics put in place that can be framed, can be used by privatizers to frame the public schools as failing, and that they've leveraged that throughout the decades to create a sort of a public perception that American public schools are failing. And then to me, one of the most cynical things that I see is when people come in and promote vouchers or promote quote unquote school choice. They're saying, well, we have to do this because there are so many poor kids stuck in failing schools. Can you help sort of demystify that and sort of help educators who see the nonsense in that have a cogent argument why that's a problem, that why that's so that's such a wrong view?
Well, as I said before, the testing data is misused. Most tests are scored on a bell curve, and they're designed so that most of the kids will not be on in the top half. The top half will only have half the kids in it. The bottom half will always have half the kids in it. But there have been numerous public figures who have reiterated this phony claim that our schools are failing. Our schools, in fact, are not failing. In most cases, they're underfunded. The teachers have too many kids in the classroom, and they could be far more successful if they had smaller classes, and if they had the physical conditions that they need. We know that there are some states where the schools are in very poor physical shape, and kids are learning in very difficult circumstances. So the hue and cry for school choice really took off around 1990. And in the book that you have on the shelf behind you, I describe some of the turning points there, where we had in 1990, first the charter school movement takes off, and that was in the late 1980s that both charters and vouchers began to get momentum. And the charters were sold, and I was on the other side. I worked for the Republican administration, and I was all in favor of charters. But the idea was charters would take the kids who were falling behind and would help them in ways that regular public schools were not. And the idea of charters was even pushed by Albert Shanker, who was then the leader of the American Federation of Teachers. And this was his idea, was that charters would be unionized, and that they would take the kids who were sitting in the back of the class with their head on their desk because they were so bored and so totally detached from school. Well, now we've had, I could think the first charter opened around 1991, and we have a lot of information about them. First is, on average, they do no better than public schools. Those that have incredible high scores cherry pick their students. They don't want the kids who have special needs. They don't take the kids who are going to drag their scores down. They select the families that are going to be most involved. I know one recent book said they don't select the children as much as they select the families. So the most successful by test scores charters are those that select their students with care and kick out the ones they don't want. And the least successful go under. Every year there are charter schools that close. And some years there are as many that are closing as there are that are opening. And oddly enough, the biggest supporter of charter schools is the federal government. Um, Bill Clinton started a program in 1994 called the Federal Charter Schools Program. And it was supposed to help charter schools grow because there were so few of them at that time. And it was a $6 million program. It's now a program that gets $440 million a year. It keeps opening charter schools and gives money to states. South Carolina, I think, just got money to open a charter school run by Moms for Liberty, which is one of those groups that is pushing the book banning and the censorship in public schools. But charters have not been a success in the sense that they're not a model. They open and close like daylilies, and there have been numerous scandals associated with charter schools where the people who run them are not educators. The charter sector has attracted entrepreneurs. It's also attracted grifters. We have charter chains that have replaced neighborhood public schools. And to me, in a way, this is one of the most shocking things about the charter movement is that the charters have become almost like Walmart. You have KIPP, which sometimes had good schools, sometimes not so good, but it's a couple of hundred schools that are run by a chain operated from, I forget if it's Houston or New York or some other city, but it's like Walmart's that way. It's not local, and there's no elected school board. And I guess the good thing about KIPP is it's not run for profit. The worst charter schools are run for profit, and there are a number of charter chains that have made a lot of money. There are also a number of charters that have where the operators are in jail or have spent a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years in jail because they've embezzled millions of dollars. I'd say in the charter sector, the worst of them all are the online charter schools. And that's a sector that's rife with corruption. And a number of their operators have been imprisoned for theft because a common practice is to count students who actually never attended. And I remember some years ago, I had breakfast with somebody from the NCAA who told me that they were no longer accepting credits or diplomas from certain virtual charters because he said the diplomas were fake and they did not consider them to be real diplomas.
Mm.
Ohio had a virtual charter that got to be the largest high school in the country with the lowest graduation rate. I think it was around 20%. The guy who owned ECOT, the Electronic Classroom of Tomorrow, was asked to return. He collected $1 billion over 20 years, and he was asked to return 67 million and declared bankruptcy, and that's gone. But in the meanwhile, a lot of kids got not a very good education because the online charter schools have the worst graduation rates, the highest dropout rates, the lowest grades, and yet they continue to collect money from states all over the country. So the charters have been a huge disappointment in that they don't, the ones that do well pick their students, and the ones that don't do well go out of business or just get closed down by the state or continue providing poor education. The voucher movement has been very aggressive, particularly in the last year or two. There have been a number of states this year and in the last year that have endorsed voucher legislation. And the sad thing about that is we know so much about vouchers that we didn't know 30 years ago. In 1996, Ohio passed legislation allowing Cleveland to have vouchers. And the idea then was there are so many kids who are doing so badly in the Cleveland public schools, let's give them vouchers. Why not try it? And the case went to the Supreme Court, which approved Cleveland's voucher program because they said, well, the money isn't going to religious schools, it's actually going to parents, which is always the rationale for sending public money to religious schools. So Cleveland today is one of the worst performing districts in the country. The only one that is a lower performing district is Detroit. And Detroit doesn't have vouchers because the voters in Michigan have never passed that legislation. But Detroit is flooded with charter schools. So, you know, school choice is not a way to improve education. What we know about vouchers now are two things. One is there are a lot of people who want the voucher money, Catholic Church, Catholic schools, but also evangelical schools. And when the voucher programs are passed, the cry goes up, as you said earlier, it's to save poor children, particularly minority children who are trapped in failing public schools. Well, that turns out to be not just an overstatement, but a lie, because the kids who leave public schools and go to voucher schools are not going to elite schools. They're not going to the pricey private schools that don't want them. And the voucher never would, not in any state, will cover the cost of one of those elite private schools. In some states, the elite private schools are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, and the voucher is only worth $5,000 or $6,000 or $8,000. And the elite private school wants people who can pay, are people who meet whatever their high academic standards are. So this is not. They're not going to the great private schools. The kids are going to religious schools where the teachers are uncertified, where the principal is uncertified, and where the curriculum very frequently is a Bible-based curriculum. So they're not learning about modern science. They may not even be learning about modern math, and they're not getting modern history. They're getting a very skewed, inadequate, third-rate education. And there are pop-up private schools that are created just to get the voucher money. And they too are very poor schools with uncertified teachers, and they're there for the money. And the other thing, and I think this is crucial, is that in every state that's adopted vouchers, most of the vouchers are collected not by kids in failing public schools, but by kids who are already in private school. They're collected by kids who are attending religious schools now, and kids who have, in fact, never. Let me turn this off.
Okay.
It's my son calling me. The vouchers go to mostly, the majority of vouchers in every state with vouchers goes to kids who never attended public school. In some cases, like in Florida and Arizona, which have universal vouchers, those vouchers are subsidizing rich kids who are attending the elite private schools. So their tuition may be $25,000 or $30,000, and they're very pleased to take the $8,000 or $10,000 that the state is handing out. They're freebies. So the other thing is that the kids who leave public school to go to voucher school do not gain academically. In fact, they fall behind the kids that they left behind in public school. There's a voucher researcher named Joshua Cowen, Cowen. He's a professor at Michigan State University. He's been studying vouchers now for almost 20 years. And he realized that about a year or two ago, he said, this is actually hurting kids. The academic results of going to a voucher school for a kid who transfers from public school is worse than the learning loss of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So, why would you continue to do harm? The thing that gets me is the politicians, whether they're in South Carolina or Oklahoma or Ohio, they know that the results are terrible. The only evaluation done of vouchers in Ohio, where there are 5 different voucher programs, was highly critical and said that the kids were actually falling behind. And yet the politicians in Ohio just keep lowering the entry requirements and raising the income level so that I think at this point you can have 5 times the federal poverty level and qualify for a voucher 5 times. So this is not saving poor kids. This is just allowing more money to go to middle class and upper middle class families.
That just kind of gives away the game, right? I mean, it's not really about improving educational outcomes. It's really about just saying a philosophy that the free market is what we should apply to every sector, including public education. Is like one of the few remaining sectors that hasn't been given over to the free market, and they see that as an opportunity. These for-profit corporations see this opportunity, and then of course they fund the political campaigns of people who will go in and vote for vouchers as sort of this evolutionary step towards full privatization. And then I spoke with a superintendent here in South Carolina, and he just believes that they'll get everybody to do vouchers and go to send their kids to private schools, and the private schools will raise their tuition, and then they do away with the vouchers, and then everybody's forced, like our medical system, to pay out of pocket or to purchase some kind of educational plan for their kids. Because exactly what you said in the beginning, it's like there's just this philosophy that people believe I shouldn't have to pay for other kids to go to school, and it's pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. There's no sort of public incentive for us to educate young people. It's like, and there's this opportunity for people to profit in public education system. I want to ask you, because standardized testing is, to me, a huge piece of this. I talk a lot about how we have amazing educators, and those educators are doing an amazing job in really tough conditions, but they're almost handcuffed by the demands of standardized testing, which is maybe initially was intended to be something to sort of level the playing field and make sure everybody's being evaluated the same way, and that all kids everywhere have access to a great education. But I've heard you argue that we spend $1.7 billion a year on this testing, and you can already tell me what the results are going to be based on socioeconomic conditions of the schools, and they don't really tell us anything. And yet they're the primary thing, it seems, that we are focused on, and that strips educators of autonomy. We get into scripted curricula because they're so myopically focused on raising test scores. And this, to me, sucks out of a lot of the joy out of teaching and learning, and creates the kind of conditions where teachers want to quit because they didn't get into paint by numbers. They didn't get into the profession for that. And students, you're kind of squashing their curiosity by forcing them to sort of go along with these pacing guides and benchmarks and things like that, all to serve the needs of the God, which is testing.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I was going to say, I think you summarized them fairly well. I used to be a great proponent of standardized testing for all the reasons that you hear from people on the right. But after I spent 7 years on the National Testing Board, I learned a lot about testing, and none of it was very good. For one thing, the very often the kids are being tested on something they weren't taught. The teacher was teaching the lessons she thought was or he thought was important, but that's not on the test. So the test is testing, or do you know what's on the test? And can you answer this decontextualized information? Can you decipher it? And the problem is that in the end, what I learned on the National Testing Board was you could look at the scores and they would be arrayed by income. The richest kids get the highest scores, and the poorest kids get the lowest scores. Now, then I started looking around, and I saw on the SAT, same thing. Higher your family income, higher your test score, lower, and the same is true at the other end. Now, there will be kids who defy that. There'll be kids who are poor, who are just incredible. I mean, they are somehow like break out of the mold and rise above their circumstances. And there'll be rich kids who do poorly because, they're just not very smart, or they haven't figured, or they don't care. But overall, there is a very high correlation between family income, parental education, and test scores. And if your parents were illiterate, if they're poor, if you don't have a roof over your head that you can be sure of, if you don't have decent medical care, if you can't count on having three meals a day, that's going to affect your test scores.
Right.
So it's not saying that poor kids can't learn. It's just saying that they don't have the same opportunity to learn, and they're handicapped by conditions that are beyond their control. I think that if schools are, I'm a great believer in the idea of community schools. And a community school is one where the whole family gets involved. There's a food pantry. There are after-school activities that involve family members. The teachers want to be engaged with helping the family in any way they can. Having a social worker in the school. Schools are supposed to have social workers and psychologists, but a lot of those positions have been eliminated, along with the arts and recess and um, things that, as a child in public school in Houston, Texas, just took for granted that you had recess a few times a day, and now we have to have state legislation to restore recess. Children need time to play, and the lessons that kids get have to be developmentally appropriate. And all of this emphasis on test scores has warped the curriculum by squeezing out things like history and civics and the arts and physical education. And it has created tremendous incentives for teachers to teach to the test. And we even have, in many places, maybe everywhere now, practice tests. And so that teachers are being told, yes, you must teach to the test. You want to get high scores because you're going to be judged. You, the teacher, are going to be judged by your student scores, which is a totally invalid way of judging teachers, because they will be judged based on who's in their classroom. Whether if they're teaching kids who are English language learners, they're not going to see the same test scores as someone who's teaching in an affluent suburb. Or if you're teaching gifted children whose scores are already at the top, they're not going to go up anymore. They're already at the top. So I know of a school where a gifted teacher was told she was completely inadequate because her kids had the same scores last year that they did the next year, and they didn't go up. Well, once you hit the ceiling, there's no place to go. It's all ridiculous, all of this effort to turn everything into numbers and to crunch them. And the thing is that if you compare kids in voucher schools and charter schools by the same metrics, the public schools are doing a lot better. And creating three different systems weakens the public schools. It takes away, first of all, it takes away some of their best students uh, who say, oh gosh, I can go to a charter school. They're offering me all sorts of inducements, free this, a free that, and better facilities. Yeah, I see somebody recommends the testing charade. That's a great book. I recently wrote about that book and said it's one of the books that had a huge impact on me. That we pretend to evaluate children, we pretend to evaluate teachers using a flawed instrument. Well, another thing that I learned when I was on the board of the NAGB, which is the NAEP uh, oversight body, it's a federal testing agency, was that the questions are frequently bad questions. So that if you're supposed to say, all right, here are four possibilities. Which of these is right? And you look at them, and I have seen questions where I'd say, one of them is clearly wrong. Maybe the third one is also wrong, but these two, A and B, they both look right. And you know what? They're both right. And only the test maker knows which of those two you're supposed to say right. But a wise student might ponder and pick the wrong answer.
Right.
Then, so we began having these essays added to the testing, and they're graded by machines, artificial intelligence. Before they had other names for them, but before they were graded by machines, they were graded by people who gave each little essay answer a few seconds. And there was another book that had an impact on me by, it's about a guy who tells his, Todd. I'm thinking of the wrong Todd, but he wrote a book about his misadventures in the testing industry. It's called Making the Grades. And he talked about 15 years in which he worked in the testing industry grading essays. And he was paid $11 an hour, along with a lot of other people who had they had a college degree, but they had no education necessarily, and they didn't necessarily have an education background. And he said that they would grade these essays and they would be paid based on how many they could grade in an hour. So you
Mm,
can imagine how much time they spent making decisions that would determine whether a young person would go to college or not, whether a young person was told that they were worthy or not.
right.
Um, and I just think that when you understand that the essay questions, when they're graded by machine, by the way, it's even worse. And the machines are not very good at understanding and comprehending, so that you can write a totally nonsense essay. And as long as the grammar is correct and the sentences are short, you'll get a good score, even though the essay itself doesn't mean
Mm,
anything.
yeah.
So, we've just lost all touch with reality because we think that technology and standardized testing can take the role of a thinking, feeling human being, a sentient person. And the best teacher is still a person, a human, a person who can look the child in the eye and say, let me help you with this. I think you can do better. How can we improve this? And, children respond. They don't respond to machines the same way. And there's now been a goodly amount of research that shows that children actually learn more from a human teacher than they do from machine learning,
Mm.
which is not surprising.
No, yeah, it's not. And my concern over that is that even if we make testing like the main reason why we have schools, and the results of those tests are driving public perception of their quality and the quality of the instruction. If the machines end up, you know, helping students perform better on these tests, then it's like, to me, you're prioritizing the wrong metric, and I think that could potentially further dehumanize the system that we're in, and we look more and more towards technology as the answer, because we're just saying that we're just making this metric so important, so prioritized. I want to ask you, um, we have a group here in South Carolina, the South Carolina Association of School Librarians. They call themselves SCASL, and Tamara is one of their leaders, and she submitted this question. She said, "Can you explain how the push to censor books is connected to the overall attack on public education?" And I've argued that, you know, the testing piece and this sort of false notion that public schools are failing based upon these standardized test results, it wasn't quite enough, that they needed something else. So now it's like your teachers are indoctrinating your kids, they're grooming your kids, they're all Marxists, and the whole critical race theory boogeyman. All of that is just another component of the effort of these privatizers to sow public distrust in our schools. Would you agree with that assessment? And can you talk a little bit about that for Tamara and our audience?
Well, absolutely, Tamara, you are correct that the movement to privatize schools has taken up this censorship issue and book banning issue as a way of tarnishing public education. Now, I suspect that if you went into the school libraries in elite private schools, you'd find all the same books that the Moms for Liberty are complaining about in public schools. And I think that the best people to decide what belongs in a school library or a public library are trained professional librarians, because what you have going on now is an attack, one, on public schools, because, as I said, you're not going to find different books in private schools, maybe in religious schools, but not in private schools. And the other is it's an attack on trained professionals. It's the belief that any parent can say, oh, well, I don't like that book. I don't think anyone should read it. Well, if you don't want your child to read a book, send a message to the teacher or meet with the teacher and say, I don't want my child reading that book. But you should not have the power to use the power of the state and the power of the district to say no one should read that book, because if other parents think the book is fine, leave it alone. I mean, a lot of what's going on here is the attack on professionalism, the attack on public schools, but also it's a way of saying that the state should intervene and prevent people from exercising their rights, that only certain parents have rights. So when they talk about parental rights, they're talking about the parents who object to this book, the parents who object to this idea. But why are their rights greater than those of people who disagree with them? I mean, a lot of the books that are censored are books about race, racism, and Black history. Well, don't Black parents also have rights? I mean, shouldn't they be able to say, I want my child to learn about Martin Luther King. I want my child to learn about Malcolm X. I want my child to learn about what happened in the South, in South Carolina, over the past 100 years. Why should that book be taken out of the library because some parent objects to it? I don't object to it. So I think that this is an instance among many. I mean, I feel the same way about a lot of issues. The issues with trans kids. I don't have a personal view about this, but I think this is one of these issues that should be settled between parents, children, and their medical professionals. It's not something where the legislature is composed of experts who should be telling people what to do. I guess in a way I'm more libertarian than the people who are making these judgments, because they want the state to make these decisions.
Right.
And at the same time, they claim, well, we're conservative. Well, conservatives don't want to turn that power over to the state.
Yeah. And this is my argument is you keep hearing from groups like Moms for Liberty, we want parental control. And when it comes to books, parents have total control here in South Carolina. Any parent can go into the school or call up your school librarian and say, I don't want my child to check out a book unless you've approved it through me, or here's a list of books that I don't want my child to be able to check out. That's total. Yeah, they have total control right now. And when it comes to transgender healthcare, we just did something on this Tuesday night. It's like, the parents in consultation with their doctors and their child make the decisions that they think are right for their children. It's not really the role of the government. So when they talk about parental control, it's exactly what you're saying. They're just saying they want a certain type of control. They want certain parents to have control, not all parents to have control. And they want to control like what my children have access to in terms of
They
healthcare
want,
or in terms
they
of
want they want certain parents to control what all parents are able to do, and they want the government to act on their behalf, and to take away rights from other parents.
Right.
I hate to bring up the subject, but I will, and you can cut it out if you want to. But I think abortion is the same thing. I think that's a decision between a woman and her doctor and her medical health professionals. And why the state gets involved, I don't understand. This is a very personal decision that a woman and her medical professional should make. But the same thing is true of censoring books and having the legislature make decisions about how you lead your private life. I would say that they should focus on things like jobs, the economy, improving people's lives, providing better health care, making sure that everybody has medical insurance, strengthening your child labor laws, things like that. Those are things that we count on the legislature to do, not to tell us how to live our personal lives.
Yeah. I've visited a couple of private schools in a rural town in Virginia, and they're not a religious affiliation. But what I've noticed in that school is these teachers and students are privileged in that they're not having to worry about the standardized test metric sort of overshadowing everything they do, and they're able to pay attention to social emotional learning, the sort of human elements that are needed for all of us, for the teachers to flourish, for the students to flourish. And I went up and shot some footage, some interviews, and I'm piecing together this docu-series on these schools, because what I'm frustrated by is the fact that you would have to go to a private entity to be able to access a system that actually treats people um, like human beings. Because I see so many of our public schools, it's not the people in them, it's the system that they're trapped in because of the standardized testing pressures, that it kind of like dehumanizes the whole process. Tell me if you feel free to push back on that, but like, how do you feel about the notion that one would have to go work in one of these very rare private schools in order to experience or get away from standardized testing and have some semblance of autonomy?
Well, I think that you're right. And I think that when people have the means to do so, if they can afford it, they will go to a school where their kids are free of all this testing pressure. Um, and I think the other thing that strikes me is that when states like Florida and Arizona and a few others adopt universal vouchers, they do not, that means kids can go anywhere with state money. The voucher schools don't have to give the test.
That's
You
right.
know, if the tests are so great for public schools, why doesn't the public money require the voucher schools to give tests? They don't even know how these kids are doing. They don't want to know. And in fact, I saw a story and posted on my blog last week that Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders assured a group of religious people that if they accepted vouchers, they could go on discriminating.
Yeah,
So, here, what I think we're really seeing is all the reasons we discussed before about privatizations, about destroying the public good and turning it into a consumer good,
that's it.
but also we are seeing a sweeping away of any effort to implement the Brown decision because the voucher idea and also the charter idea, it all comes from the 1950s. That was a time where, right after the Brown decision, states like South Carolina and the whole Deep South uh, tried to pass legislation and did pass legislation to set up, first of all, segregation academies, which we would call charter schools, where the school decides who they want to enroll and also decides who they want to kick out. And also, the number of states endorsed vouchers. And the purpose of the voucher was to allow white children to escape and go to private schools so they wouldn't have to go to sit next to black children. So this is where vouchers and charters came from. And what we're seeing now is an effort to roll back everything since, since the courts started saying, no, you really do have to desegregate.
Right. It's almost it is like a resegregation, but the thing that makes me so infuriates me so much is that the people who are proponents of it frame it as we're doing this for the poor children so they have a choice. And it's like, really, do they are so are these private schools forced to take students with special needs? Are they going to provide transportation to the school? Are we going to are we sure that then they're not going to raise the tuition? Because supply and demand says if more people have coupons to go to these schools, that I can raise my tuition rates and then continue to exclude kids. And like you mentioned, where these vouchers have been implemented, they're primarily used by people who are already sending their kids to private schools. This is not like a new thing where this is really having some kind of profoundly positive impact on kids in poverty.
And
And
and and I think the discrimination part is very important. You can't leave that out. These schools that get vouchers are not required to comply with any federal law regarding student admission. They don't have to provide special services for kids with disabilities. They don't have to accept anyone that they don't want to accept. They can continue to be one race. They can exclude children who are gay. They can exclude children who are not of their religious sect. So it doesn't make any sense. It's really eliminating the civil rights laws and having the public pay for schools that discriminate and segregate.
right. Robert Shepard's watching. He asked us, could you address the larger issue of the loss of teacher autonomy and the micromanagement of them by outsiders? And I've definitely seen that. And this is one of the things that I think in South Carolina, we're seeing over the past 4 to 5 years, we continue to set records in terms of the number of vacant classrooms, the number of teachers leaving the profession, many of them in the first 4 to 5 years of the profession. So there's this mass exodus of teachers. And I think a lot of it has to do with exactly what Robert's saying, which is this loss of teacher autonomy. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I think there are two factors, and I know Bob Shepard, and he comments on my blog, and he's brilliant. Uh, and he has made the point, first of all, that the standardized testing is extremely demotivating, both to students and to teachers. The results of them are misused, and they're used to standardize teaching and standardized curriculum. And the other factor is the Common Core. And Common Core was an effort to impose a common curriculum on the entire country, which was madness. Many states have either, uh, well, they all, almost, I think 45 of them signed on because they wanted to be eligible for federal money that was offered. And the Common Core has been a disaster. One of my sons sent me an article that was in Slate, written by a college professor, who said that he can no longer assign long essays. And he said, I used to be able to assign a 30-page essay and know that my students would read it. Now they have trouble getting through a 10-page essay. He said, maybe part of it has got to be the cell phone culture. But he says, I think some of it has to do with the Common Core, because students are not accustomed to reading books. They're accustomed to reading decontextualized snippets of information, which would be very much like what will appear on a standardized test. And this has been very bad for students' ability to concentrate and to read something that's challenging and something that is more than a few pages. So I think that this has got to be tremendously uh, disconcerting to teachers who come into teaching wanting to open up young minds, wanting to uh, teach children to love learning, and then
Mhm.
they're presented with a scripted curriculum and with the need to get higher and higher scores on tests that have nothing to do with what they think they should be teaching. So I think the loss of teacher autonomy has been crucial, and it explains a lot about why we have lost so many people from teaching, and people come into teaching with high expectations, and then they don't want to stay because they find that they're expected to be technicians rather than teachers.
Yeah.
Um, Someone a few weeks ago sent me a manuscript, and I wish I could remember the title of it, but I'll think of it and I'll send it to you. In which she said, "This is the way teaching used to be," and she described what she did as a teacher uh, 25 years ago. And
Mm.
she said, this is what a typical day was like. And it was kids exploring, engaging, reading,
Right.
writing things. But she had control of her classroom, and her kids would have done, I'm sure they would have been wonderful if they were given a test. But the best tests are the ones that the teachers write, because the teachers know what they taught.
Yeah.
And why should you have to tailor what you want to teach to what somebody in a corporate office sends to your school district, to your state?
Yeah. I um I think it might have been Deborah Meyer who said the further the locus of control is away from the classroom, the worse off we are. And I feel like that's such a powerful concept. And I think a lot of young teachers who haven't been in the game a long time don't necessarily know anything different. It's just like I think a lot of teachers just take for granted, okay, yes, my goal here is just to get my kids to perform well on these tests, and like that's just the default state. They don't realize that there was actually a time when you could follow your students' interests, that you weren't constantly having to look at a benchmark or look at a pacing guide, that you could have some freedom to bring in a different book or different materials and kind of adjust based upon the curiosity of your students. But now I have reports where a sixth grade math teacher was told they have to have the same agenda on the board with the same problems and the same homework, so that when someone goes around all the sixth grade math teams, that the administrator is seeing and evaluating the same thing, so that they all have to be on the same page and there can't be any complaints that this teacher's doing something different. So it takes the artistry and the craftsmanship out of the profession. And I think, like you said, it's like when you reduce it to this technical mechanical process, you drive away really great teachers who just see that and it's anathema to them. It's like, I don't want to be a technician. I want to be an artist. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's fueled by the privatizers as well, because they know if we can get good teachers out of this profession, then the system will crumble much faster.
Well, I think that if you consider what they've done over the past 50 or so years, um, first defaming the schools, telling the public that their schools uh, are failing, and driving this message in again and again. And then you have people like Bill Gates funding the movie Waiting for Superman, which says the only way you'll ever get a decent education is to go to a charter school, which is total nonsense. It's not
Yeah.
true. Even at the time that movie came out in 2010, it was not true. I think at that time, fewer than 1 in 5 charter schools uh, had, forgive me for saying this, but had higher test scores than public schools. They, most of them were simply either no different or far worse. But we've had people like, and I think we should talk a little bit about the money, who's behind this. Bill
Yeah,
Gates has
please.
been a huge driver of this so-called reform. And to the point where I don't even use the word reform anymore because it's become a pejorative. Reform now means testing and choice and accountability and high stakes for teachers and high stakes for students. And it's all, as Deborah Meyer would say, it's all wrong. But in addition to Bill Gates, there was Eli Broad, who was sending out superintendents who were not educators, who believed in all this stuff that you and I are agreeing is bad for kids and bad for education. But in addition to them, we had the far right billionaires who stayed in the background, whether it was Betsy DeVos, who's been pushing for vouchers all of her life, and she's a billionaire. There's a whole bunch of the richest man in Pennsylvania is a guy named Jeffrey Yass, and he's a billionaire, of course. And he just gave $6 million to the governor of Texas to push harder for vouchers. Uh, I think Texas is something you should know about. They have their own homegrown billionaires. Like I think there's the Wilkes, Dunn, Ferris. These guys are all billionaires who want vouchers. They're evangelically inclined. They want children to have a religious education.
Right.
Um, and the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, wants vouchers. He decided this was the year, although he's been governor for many years, this was the year he was going to get vouchers. So he put his bill in, and the rural Republicans said no. First of all, they know that their communities love their public schools. They know that the public schools are the biggest employer in their community. They know that their teachers are their friends and their neighbors. They know that their schools are not grooming their students. They're not run by pedophiles. Their libraries don't have bad books in them. And they want more money for their public schools. They don't want to create competition and give kids vouchers to go somewhere else. So 21 or 22 Republicans in a heavily Republican legislature voted against vouchers. And along with every Democrat, they killed Governor Abbott's voucher bill. He called 4 special sessions and it was killed in every one of them. So now Governor Abbott is running a campaign to defeat the Republicans who stood up to him. And he's saying they took away, they didn't want to raise teacher pay. He doesn't say they're anti-voucher. He said because he said he would not increase teacher pay unless these Republicans agreed to give him vouchers. And they
Mm.
said, no, we're not going to be bribed. We don't want vouchers. So now he's campaigning against them with lies and saying that they are against raising teacher pay and against funding our schools when he's against all of that and wants vouchers. But I think the important lesson to be learned from Texas is rural Republicans understand often, not always, but often, that vouchers are terrible because they know their schools and they know that their schools are the heart of their community and they don't want to defund them. So the most important thing I think, and if I can drive this message in, one is that schools should be adequately funded. And they're in many places in this country, they're not. And another is that teachers should be well paid as professionals and they should be respected as professionals. When I visited In Finland, I was very impressed. First of all, they have no standardized testing in grades K through 9. And I think in the 9th grade, they take a test to decide whether they're going to go to a technical school or an academic high school. But standardized testing just doesn't play a role in their schools. What they care most about is the well-being of children. I mean, when I talk about what I saw and what I've learned about Finland, and I became very friendly with Finnish educators, it was like talking about another world, and it is another world. They care about children's health and well-being. They make sure that they run outside, whether it's raining or snowing. They run outside between classes and run around for whether it's 5, 10, 15 minutes. Teachers have a lounge room, which is very beautiful and well appointed. Their goal as a nation is that every school should be a good school. So they don't care where you choose to go to school because all the schools are public schools and they're all good schools. And they care about creativity. They're very proud of the children who play instruments and the children who are in bands and the children who are active in sports. But competition is not a big thing for them.
No.
My friend Pasi Sahlberg, who wrote a book called Finnish Lessons, said, we don't want to be number one. We prefer, if we're skiing, we prefer to be number 2 so that we can go behind somebody else who's already created the tracks. But, it's about, what it's about is about having healthy, happy children.
Yes. Amen. And this is the I think the illusion that we're under is that we have this idea that we have to have this accountability system and rank all the states and have all these state report, district and school report cards, all based on these metrics, because we have to create this competition because it's the only way we can motivate teachers to teach and students to learn. And yet you see a system like what Finland has, and they're doing quite well compared to their international peers. And we've got a model there for what we can move to, and yet we double down on not only the test and punish culture, but then say, well, we ought to move to this free market idea, which is going to, like, to me, is a direct threat to democracy, and a direct and is going to make outcomes worse because you have that more of the haves and have-nots. You're completely destroying the playing field, and we're already seeing that in terms of economic inequality, and you add this educational component to it. I fear where we're headed, and rather than though gin up fear, what I'd like to do as we kind of move to, you've given me as much of your time, and I'll stay in as long as you want, but what can educators do? Let's talk about something positive. What can educators do individually and collectively to address the problems that we're discussing tonight?
Well, I think number 1 is to never lose your sense of why you're an educator. Number 1 is to not swallow the Kool-Aid. And the Kool-Aid is that education is all about test scores. It's important to remember why you went into education, and you didn't go into education to raise test scores. You went into education to help every child in front of you become the best person they can be. And whether it's through the arts or through science or through hands-on experiences and building things and making things, be the best you can be. But, I know you can't ignore the test scores because it can get you fired. But I think that if children are free to love learning, they're going to do fine on the test. And don't let the test drive you. I think it's also the second most important: vote, organize. Um, in my ideal world, every state would have a teachers union, and every teacher would have a union that fought for their rights and fought for, what does a union do? I don't belong to a union. I never have. But I believe in unions. Unions are the very best way for teachers and for students and for everybody who believes in public education to have a seat at the table. Right now, public education is on the table. It's on the table as something to be dished out and tossed away. But to have a seat at the table is to be able to have somebody argue with the legislature, we're not going to vote for you if you don't support your public schools. And we're not going to vote for you if you don't raise the budget and make sure that we don't have a leaky roof and that we have air conditioning so that our kids can learn in the hot months. We have to have enough money so that the kids have small enough classes so that somebody knows who they are, pays attention to their needs, and gives them the education that they need to grow and to develop and to be the best they can be. So I think those are the most important things for teachers is don't ever lose your sense of values. Don't ever let them turn you into a testing technician.
Right.
Fight for your children, fight for your profession, and join with other teachers and join with parents and stand up against the people who want to destroy public schools and who censor books and ban books and want to use the state to impose their narrow-minded views on everyone.
Thank you so much. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to share? Did you want to talk about your blog or any of your books? Is there any topic we've not covered that you wanted to talk about tonight? I want to just give you
Well,
an opportunity.
I could probably go on talking for hours, but I can't. I think the important thing to bear in mind is that this effort to destroy public education is anti-democratic, it's elitist, it's very dangerous, and we have to defeat it because I worry about the future of our country if everybody is only going to get the kind of education that they can afford to pay for. The great, great idea of public education was that there would be schools open to all and that these schools would all have certified, qualified teachers and would be run in the best interest of the children. We don't have that now, and that's what we have to fight for. And I would encourage you to read my blog. I spend a lot of time. I'm now retired, so I have time to spend writing my blog, and I write about whatever I want to write about. I do a lot of aggregating of other people's work, but I always introduce it with why I think it's important, and it covers a lot of topics. I would urge you to read my last three books. I used to be a conservative, and I have to acknowledge that the last three books started off with The Death and Life of the Great American School System, How Testing and Choice Are Undermining Education. Uh, Learn about Campbell's Law. Campbell's Law says that when a test becomes the measure of what you do, it becomes so important that you forget about what you're doing and only care about the measure. And
Yes.
it distorts everything you do. So do please read The Death and Life of the Great American School System. And please read Reign of Error. Both of those books were national bestsellers. Reign of Error I wrote because a journalist said to me, "Well, you have lots of criticisms. Where are your positive solutions?" So I said, "Okay, I'm going to write them out." So I wrote this book called Reign of Error, which not only had all the usual criticisms of what we're doing is wrong, but it also had about a third of the book is devoted to solutions. And it's a life cycle series of solutions. It begins with prenatal care, that we have a level of prenatal care in this country that is scandalous. According to the records at that time, and I don't think they're any better, the World Health Organization ranked us on par with Somalia. We're like a third
Mm.
world country in terms of the access to prenatal care. And what happens when women do not have prenatal care is that they are apt to have babies who are born dead, or apt to have babies who have developmental disabilities when they should have been born perfectly healthy had the mother had decent prenatal care. So that was number one of a series of my recommendations. But keep learning, keep thinking, keep resisting, keep organizing, and stand up for what's right. Stand up for the principles that will continue to make us a great country. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you, Diane. You are such an inspiration to me and to millions of educators across the country. And you're really a personal hero of mine. You're on the Mount Rushmore for me. Uh, education thought leaders. And I just want to say how much I appreciate your willingness to do this tonight, to give us your time, and how you just are relentlessly advocating for educators and public schools in America. And your voice has been so important, and I thank you.
Well, it's our future, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Diane. That was Diane Ravitch. I mean, I'm just blown away. It's like a really, truly a dream come true to be able to speak with her, and to have an hour of her time is just amazing. And I want to reiterate something that she said, which is the union is the answer. And in South Carolina, there's one union for educators, and that's the South Carolina Education Association. And that's why I'm here tonight. I'm here because of the South Carolina Education Association, the state affiliate of the National Education Association, which is the largest labor union in the United States. Without a union, we're just not going to be able to make the progress we need to make. We're going to continue to see the deterioration of our public schools and our profession. We're going to continue to see teachers exploited, not being paid what they deserve. Continue to see like planning time stripped away, autonomy stripped away. And the only way to push back against that is you can't do it. It's so hard to do that individually. When you come together and you use collective power, you can make things happen. We just saw the right to work law die in Michigan. That can happen in South Carolina, but it can't happen if we close our classroom doors, buy cheap insurance, and hope that somebody in Columbia is going to fight the fight well enough for us. That model does not work. In fact, that model is what's preventing us from actually accessing the power that we need to come together, to be unified, and then push back together to fight for the things that we need. That has to happen on 3 different levels. It has to happen on the national level because, as Diane points out, a lot of this comes down from federal policy. No Child Left Behind, race to the top. So if we're not advocating at the national level, we're missing a huge piece. Then at the state house in Columbia, and then also importantly at our local levels. And that's why our union is incredible, is because we're doing all 3 of those things. And that's why our dues are a little bit more, because you're joining a local, a state, and a national association. We can worry, if you want to save a few bucks, but like, are we really saving money? If you get cheap insurance, what are we sacrificing in terms of salary long term by not coming together and fighting forcefully in a union? That's what I don't understand. I don't understand why we wouldn't do that. Thankfully, over the past couple of years, we've seen the SCEA grow substantially. We're one of the fastest growing affiliates of the NEA in the entire country. And we're so proud of that. We have an amazing team of people at the SCEA who are working tirelessly every day to build the movement. If you want to be a part of that, you can go to jointhescea.org or text the word join to 48744. A couple of things I want to promote before we, and by the way, if you were just tuning in, you can go back and watch the whole thing. We'll post this to the cool website. We'll post this to the SCEA's YouTube page as well. So you'll be able to watch the whole thing. But a couple of things coming up. We're going to do a Cool Beans podcast on our Cool Coaching program, which is our one-on-one program for induction teachers. That's coming up next week, February 20th from 7 to 7:30. On the 28th, Audrey Kalianos is going to come on and talk about body image. It's something called the Body Project. She is a registered dietitian and does amazing work. She creates cool content that you can find on the Cool website. Our Cool Coaching is ongoing every Tuesday and Thursday nights from 6 to 8 o'clock. Angie, Stephanie, Marcella, ready and waiting to work with our induction teachers in a Zoom call to give them support. If you are interested in coming on a mindfulness retreat, Yelena Popovich and I are facilitating 2 mindfulness retreats for educators. There's 1 spot left for the June 12th through the 14th retreat, and there's 9 spots still open for the one that we just launched for the 2 weeks after this one, June 26th through the 28th. You can go to the Cool website, cool.us, and look for the retreat tab, or just type in cool.us/retreat. A couple of other things. We have the Trauma Informed Education Workshop coming up July 11th. Karen Beam and Jennifer Dollar, who run the Trauma Informed Education Masters in Trauma Informed Education program at Columbia College, will be coming with me to talk about trauma for the day. Lunch will be provided. This is free for members of our union. It is $40 for non-members. And by the way, the retreat is $150 for our members. That includes 2 nights of accommodations, all of your meals, a book, all of your training, yoga, all that stuff for $150 for our members. That's an amazing, one night of lodging is almost that much. So, and then we have the Educator Health and Wellness Day coming up July 19th at Columbia College. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to share with you. I talked about this a little bit in this interview with Diane, and that is the docuseries I've created called Rehumanizing School. And I want to show you the trailer. If you haven't seen it yet, here's the trailer.
One of the things that I treasure about Blue Mountain School is the genuine relationship we're in with each other here.
And what I've experienced at Springhouse is that when you're actually in community together, both at Springhouse, but then again in the small town of Floyd, it's like you can really tend to someone's development where they are transformed by what we're doing. And I really trust the young people that are going into the world.
Now I see my connection to the earth, and now I know where I fit in the cosmology of the world.
For me, it's helped me really meet like all of the needs I have for like rest and introspecting and the self-care I need to do and building relationships and being in nature. It's very honoring of that rather than an end goal.
There's a lot of love here, and I think that love is something that doesn't always have a place in education.
My friend Riley, he was shy for the first 3 days of school until on Thursday while he was at recess up in that tree over there. I asked him what his name was and what he liked to do. From then on, we bonded and made friends.
Once you get to know this place a lot, you just feel welcome. Life's just kind of easy when you get to know this place a lot. And, you have friends.
When he came here, he told me that this is one of his best places he's ever been in his life. I was like, oh, well, that's good. Like, Floyd is a really good place. Like, you get to have fun, especially at Blue Mountain. You get to see a lot of kids' happiness. If you went to Blue Mountain, it would probably make your heart warm up.
Well, this sounds really a bit conceited, but my teenagers are extraordinary. All of them here are. I love all the kids here, not just my own, but they're extraordinary. And the thing is, I look around when I go out and see like the real world, the normal, the norm, and I think all these people could be.
If you're not cultivated, if you're only you're only brought up to do what you do because you're afraid of getting in trouble or you want a prize, that leaves the self undeveloped. And so what I would love, and what happens here at Blue Mountain, is we are cultivating a self that can then be self-directed, can be self-regulated, and then grows up to be what it's really meant to be, rather than a reaction or a response to these external things. There's an actual, oh, I'm a seed and this is what I'm growing up to be.
So that's what this school is for teens and adults, is to really support the development, the natural development of a unique individual person. There will never be another person like you or I or anyone. And it's so hard for me to understand how we can't hold that with such reverence.
All right, that is the trailer to Rehumanizing School. If you're interested in having early access to the full docuseries, there's going to be 4 episodes. There will be some other bonus materials along with that, including full interviews with the students and teachers at these schools, these small rural schools in Floyd, Virginia. If you're interested in that, just go to cool.us/rehumanizing school. You can sign up. You'll get early access. So on April 22nd, you'll be given a passcode to get in and watch the whole series. We're going to actually do the world premiere of that in Floyd, Virginia on April 19th. I'm really excited about going back to the community where we shot all that footage and letting that community see this docuseries before we release it to the rest of the world. Couple of other things. You can find everything we do at cool.us. Also, just want to shout out again Diane's resources at networkforpubliceducation.org and her blog, dianeravitch.net. She's also on Twitter. She really great content that she's putting out constantly. Couple of comments that came in. I just want to thank Michelle for tuning in and all of her comments, and we'll be talking more tomorrow, Michelle. Robert, thank you so much. Absolutely, we need a revitalization of the union movement. Cindy, thank you for always tuning in and supporting all the work we do at Cool. Amazing advocate here in South Carolina. Yelena Popovich, thank you for tuning in. Appreciate that. Alan Morris. I don't know Alan really well, but I've heard his name and I've seen his name a lot. Thank you, Alan, for tuning in. Gail Green says that Diane Ravitch is truly an inspiration and a hero, and I couldn't agree more. She absolutely is a big hero of mine and really informs a lot of my thinking on education policy. Thanks to Gwendolyn for tuning in. Again, to Robert, who just ordered Gail's book. And we had so many people tune in. Tamara Cox and Emily and Jackie and Casey and just a lot of people, Jean and Kat. Thank you for everybody tuning in tonight for this really amazing conversation with Diane Ravitch. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I hope that you'll explore all the resources that we have at our Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. The bottom line, the thing I want to leave you with is this. We can't allow this system to be further mechanized, and we can't allow this system to be privatized. We can't allow our public schools to be destroyed, because our democracy is hanging by a thread right now. And you destroy public schools, I don't know that our democracy can survive. And that may sound hyperbolic, but I really believe that's true. So it's going to require all of us coming together to defend our public schools, using our voices, reposting this kind of content, speaking up, voting, getting folks registered to vote. And we need everybody on board. We need to bring everybody into this, because saving our public schools really is saving America. And it's that important. So I hope that you will join us. If you are in another state, look at who your NEA affiliate is in your state. Join your union. And if you're in South Carolina, join the SCEA. Join the SCEA.org. Thanks again to everybody for tuning in. We will see you next week, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And I love you all. Happy Valentine's, late Valentine's Day, everybody. Love you all. See you on the next live stream.